Is your drive to do it all actually what's holding your team back? What if the secret to stronger leadership isn't actually doing more, but it's letting go? In this episode of LeadWell with Jacqui, I'm joined by Jonno White, and we're going to explore the surprising power of delegation, how to challenge your team without pushing them to burnout, and why the right amount of stress might actually be exactly what your team needs. So if you're ready to grow as a leader by growing others, this one is for you. First of all, Jonno, a very warm welcome.
Thank you so much for having me and for being patient with me in the background as we've organised this.
No problem at all. So, Jonno, you're co-founder of your consultancy, Clarity Group Global. You facilitate retreats and offsites for executive groups, and you've also written a book called Step Up or Step Out, which has been read by over 10,000 leaders globally. So, before we dive into all things delegation, I'd love to hear a bit about your journey and what led you to writing your book.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in terms of what we do, like you said, in terms of our work now, one way that I like to summarize it is I really come alongside leaders and help them build a workplace culture that employees would move cities to work in and customers will line up to buy from. So that's kind of the end goal, that real culture piece. Where the book came from, to tell a very brief story, is I had the best intentions as a leader, and I found myself in a position where I had some people that were different to me, and I was finding them difficult to lead. And so, with the best intentions, thinking I was doing the right thing, and being what I believe is a pretty nice guy, I went about a process that ended up blowing up in my face spectacularly. And, that landed me in a place where I was sitting under a tree crying, which I don't do regularly. There's nothing wrong with that. But for me, I was just torn apart by this process because I think for me, it was the fact that I'd hurt people, and yet that wasn't my intention at all. So I really felt like it was unfair. And that's what started me on the journey towards Step Up or Step Out, because I went, there has to be a better way. There must be a way to deal with conflict, to deal with people that are different to you, that doesn't blow up in everyone's faces. And so as I started doing that and going through that process and listening to different people on the topic, that's where the framework in Step Up or Step Out came from. And then I was able to use that framework with a person on my team and to see them choose to step out. And then we were able to maintain a friendship. And that was when I went, oh, okay, I'm onto something here. This is really important, and this is way better than what I did last time. And that was probably, over 10 years ago. And then finally got around to writing the book probably 4 or 5 years ago.
Right. It's interesting, isn't it? Because so often, I see this all the time, I'm sure you do as well. Someone is really good at their job, and so then they're put into a leadership role, and then they go, oh, hang on, I'm usually really good at my job. But leading is actually a completely different skill set. It's not just about being good at the tasks or the outputs. It's something that can be learned and developed over time. It's not this natural, all of a sudden I woke up one day and I'm an excellent leader.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And that was my experience. I thought I wouldn't have articulated this, but now I look back, I realize that what I believed was, if I can just be amazing at all of these individual skills that I need to grow in, then everyone will follow me into the sunset. Only to realize that I was getting better and better in all these different areas, working so hard, had great mentors. But then I remember looking around a room of 30 volunteers I was leading at a crucial point. And I remember looking around the room just going, oh, wait a second, I've missed something, because these guys are awesome. They're passionate, and yet everyone's rowing in a different direction. And I didn't know that was a thing. So what do I do now? And that was a real crucible moment for me in my leadership, where I realized maybe everything I thought about leadership is wrong, and it really is something that can be learned. And that was definitely my journey, not necessarily just a natural leader out the front and everyone following, but more of a piece by piece, putting a puzzle together about how people are wired and what unites a team and what leadership is.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's the core message, would you say, from the book? Like, what do you want people to get out of it? Is it a cheat sheet? Can they read that and be perfect?
Well, the book is The book is really specifically like if you're a manager or a leader and you have a person on your team that you're finding really difficult, then yeah, it is. It's written for you. And I have lots of feedback and testimonials where people, which I love, which is that thing of, oh, it's like this guy wrote it for me, you know? So definitely in that case. But I think the broader message that even if you're not leading in that particular scenario, or even if you're not in a leadership role yet, but you're passionate about one day being a leader, I'd say the overall message is when it comes to conflict with people, what we tend to do is we tend to drop an anvil on someone's toe. And so it's like we avoid the little conversations, we avoid the uncomfortable moments because we're trying to be nice, because we don't want to hurt people. So it's all the best intentions. And then something crosses a line. They cross the line. One of their, if you're leading people, one of your people on your team who's a great person on your team goes, you've got to deal with this, otherwise I'm out. Whatever it is, there's something that crosses a line for you, and you have to deal with it. And then we go in and we think, oh, they'll understand when I say, for the past couple of years, you must see that you haven't done blah, blah, blah very well. And so what ends up happening is we drop this anvil on someone's foot, and then we wonder why they're jumping around defensively in pain. And so the big message of the book is, hey, let's drop less anvils. Instead, let's put a stone in people's shoes and understand that when we confront the little conversation in every part of life, whether that's with family, friends, when you're willing to go there and be specific and clear and make it small and get in early, yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, you get, it can be awkward. Yes, there can be blowback, but it's infinitely better than the anvil approach.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I really want to hear your thoughts on delegation in particular. That's what we're going to be focusing on today. And I did a little bit of research and I was shocked by this statistic. So only 19% of emerging leaders have the skills they need to effectively delegate to their team.
Wow.
So it's such a crucial skill set, but so so few of us actually have it. So what's your approach when you're, inevitably coaching a leader, maybe a new leader, an emerging leader, or, I still coach executives on delegating as well. What's your approach to encourage them in their delegation?
Such an awesome topic. In fact, this is what I'm writing my next book about. I will answer your question, but the topic of my next book is it's going to be called Replace Yourself, How to Transform Your Organization Without Overwhelming Your Staff. And the first thing I'd say is I'm 100%. I was in the 81%. Like as an emerging leader, what led me to some of the frameworks that I'll be unpacking in my book was I remember going from I remember having this time where I realized, you know what, I do one of two things. I either drop something on someone and crush their spirit. I remember I had this one leader, awesome person, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to give them this task. I'm going to give them this project. I'm going to delegate it like a genius. And so I had this conversation with them. I delegated it. I was patting myself on the back. I thought I was so clever. A week later, they booked a meeting with me and they were in tears because I had just dumped this project on them without any parameters. And they were so crushed by the expectation and weight of that and how unprepared they were that they were in tears with me. And so I remember thinking, you know what, I do one of two things. I either crush someone by dumping it on them, or I hold on to it too long and then I feel like maybe I'm going to burn out. It's like that was my experience. It was like I do one or the other. And so probably the key thing, and one of the things that's kind of core to the book is with delegation. I love what's called the Square of Delegated Responsibility, and it's something that I don't know where it's come from. So if someone does, please let me know, because I would love to honor the person who originated the idea. And I think it's called different things, but the big idea is with delegation, I think we often get stuck because we do one of the two extremes. Either I hold it or I give it. And instead, the Square of Delegated Responsibility, if you think of the 4 points of a square, at the top left, there's I do, you watch. And so you actually start the process of delegation by, and it depends, different people come in at different points on the square, but the top left is basically saying, you know what, this is something I do right now. All I want you to do is just watch how I do it. You know what, you're on my executive team. I'm not asking you to run the meetings, but I want you to watch how I run our weekly meeting. And then when we catch up, I just want you to tell me what you see, what you think I could improve. Like, let's chat about it. So it's purely a starting with I do, you watch. Then you move around to the top right of the square, which is I do, you help. You invite them to start helping. Then there's a big transition from the top right to the bottom right of the square, which is now you do, I help. So it's changing the ownership, but I'm still there in the trenches helping you with it. And then all the way at the bottom left corner is you do, I watch, which is where, hey, this is now your thing. You're able to fly and run with it, but I'm there to trust, but verify. So I love that because it breaks it down. And then you can often think, okay, where one person might be ready to go straight to the bottom right of the square where they take it over and I help them, but someone else might be, way back in the top left where I just need to invite them to start watching. And so that's in the whole realm of delegation, that's probably one of the most helpful frameworks I've found.
Yeah, I agree. And actually it aligns really nicely with one that I really love, which is just assessing skill and will. So just, determining an individual. I think the first step is determining the task. Because I
Yes.
think you're right, in terms of I'm either going to crush them or I'm going to crush me by throwing everything at it. Can it
Yes.
be broken down into smaller components? And can I start to look at instead of here's this entire project, have at it, you're on your own, maybe I can break it down. And then I like that checkpoint of, okay, if I'm going to break this component down, let me assess my team members in terms of their skill, so their ability, and their will or their motivation. And I think that works really nicely with that, square of delegated responsibility, because then it's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, where do they fit in that? Where are they in their evolution of this task? And then what level of support do they need in order to succeed when I delegate it to them?
I love that skill and will. Yeah, that's good. Thanks for sharing that.
I think it's I actually think that they're really nice complementary frameworks. Like we leadership coaches, right? Like we love a framework. I love
Oh
a
yeah.
framework. But I think when you can use them together and use them as a bit of a checkpoint, it can be really helpful. And I'm really grateful that you've shared that square of delegated responsibility, because I leaders often will resist delegating. Is that something that you find? Like, how do you find leaders feel about delegating?
Yeah, it's interesting because sometimes you get the same result. You'll have a leader who's not delegating. And sometimes as you dig deeper as a coach, right, you'll find out that someone's really threatened. So one person is super threatened by potentially some of their team being smarter than them or being more successful than them. And then you'll have someone else where the symptom looks the same. They're not delegating. But for them, it's not about being threatened. They're just so concerned about the welfare of their people that they're really worried about overloading them. So I do think that delegation is a little bit, for me, it's a little bit like the hiring process, which is, I think we assume with the hiring process that, you know what, I'm going to find a person, I'm going to bring them on board. It's going to make my life easier in
Mm-hmm.
any situation. But what you learn is that initially it actually makes your life harder because when you hire them, now you've got to onboard them, now you've got to train them. If you want to do it well, you've just added much more onto your plate. And I think delegation, maybe the reason so many leaders struggle with it is because if you do want to delegate well, it does mean that initially you're putting more on your plate. So if you're at the limit, if you're at 110%, then trying to delegate can feel impossible because where are you going to find that extra space? And that's why I like what you said about breaking the tasks down. And so I do think that one of the keys to delegation um, is all, it's a bit like having difficult conversations in terms of the book. So much of the work around difficult conversations happens before the conversation.
Mm.
And if you just go into the room and think you're going to have an amazing conversation, you're probably setting yourself up for failure because the real success happens in the lead up to any conversation, like by breaking it down. And I think delegation's the same. If you can be really, really intentional about who you're delegating to, what you're delegating, you've broken it down. You do that work first. Then when you actually do go to delegate it, you're probably more likely to be successful.
Yeah. And I think you're right that it is also, it's an investment in time. Delegating, just like any kind of coaching style of leadership,
Mm,
it takes longer, definitely. But I always like to think of it as an investment in time, because we get so stuck in the
yes.
micro, don't we? Like, we get stuck in the
Mm,
day to day, and it's like, yes, I do want to develop my team members, and I will do that eventually. But right now, I'm too busy. Everything's urgent. I don't have time. And it's like,
yeah.
well, you kind of never will have time if you don't
Mm,
carve it out and make the time today to start to move some of this workload and upskill and stretch your team so that they can stay engaged and grow and expand in their role as well. So if you kind of stretch it out over 12 months, you're going to use a lot less time delegating,
oh
because
yeah.
you'll be doing less of the actual day to day, but you're front loading it.
100% agree. And I'd even go so far as to say that I don't know if you find this with leaders you work with, but I find that a lot of leaders who've arrived in their positions because of how brilliant they are at a particular individual contributor role
Mm-hmm.
sometimes get into a leadership role where they're really managing people or layers of teams, and they're a bit stuck about what to do. I mean, they're super busy, but one thing I find that I'm unpacking with executives is this idea that you know what, your real job now, like most of your job now, is actually about that team that you lead and investing in those people. Like that is, you need a new to-do list. Like your to-do list in this role is very different to when you were an individual contributor. I see this in a lot of schools. You'll have someone who's a genius at teaching and learning, and when they're doing that, yes, they have people reporting to them, but across the school, they've got their fingers on the pulse of everything and they're in lots of different meetings. And so their real work is in teaching and learning. And then they step up into a principal role.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, now everything you've done to this point is kind of 5% of what you need to do as a principal. Um, because now it's all about your team, your board, your stakeholders. It's now all about leading and managing people. And I think the biggest thing, if you want a new to-do list, and I find this with leaders, sometimes they literally need, if they're a real to-do list person, it's like, let's write a new to-do list that's about investing in your people. Like, when are you connecting with that key person on your team? Oh, well, they've been busy, I've been busy, we probably haven't caught up in a month. It's like, no, that needs to be top of your to-do list, because that is now your job. Um, it sounds obvious, but I think it's a big switch, particularly in some industries.
Yeah, I find that a lot in the corporate space. And I always think of it, I'm kind of a visual thinker, and I
Mm,
always think of it as an inverted triangle. So people kind of start in a role and they get really good at that role. And then they move into like a team leader or supervisor role, and they take their tasks with them. And then they
yes,
get into
yes.
a leader of leaders role, and then they take a portion of their tasks with them, and all of a sudden their remit is expanding and expanding, and then they're at this senior leader level going, how does anyone do this job? And exactly as you're saying, so often when you dig down, it's like, because you're still doing the tasks of 3 roles ago or 3 levels of leadership ago. And I find that when you really dig into that, it's because it's a security blanket. It's like,
Yes.
I know how to do that. And so I'm going to hold on to it because it gives me my little dopamine hits when I do it right and when I get success. So I'm going to hold on to that as I increase in my leadership journey, or if I, grow in my leadership journey. And then I want to protect my team members from having the same burden of workload that I have.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, it's usually more, it's because I want 80% of my job to be stuff that I know how to do, but I've
Yeah.
just moved into a new senior leadership, or in your example, principal role, which means 80% of my job I don't know how to do, and that doesn't feel safe for my brain.
Yeah.
So I'm going to focus
Yeah.
on, I'm going to micromanage the teachers in the classrooms because that's
Mm-hmm.
my comfort. Like, I feel safe in that space, but I'm actually not doing my job.
Yeah. It's so true, and it is such a human thing, isn't it? To be like, I think it's particularly hard because that's what got you there. So
Yep.
it's tried, it's tested, you're comfortable there, but it's also where you probably were stretched doing that, and you manage to work that out. And then if we stick with the school example, it's like so many principals that one of the things they want to do is lock themselves away in their office and get on top of their workload. And one of the things I found with great principals who lead amazing schools with, the type of culture where teachers do want to move, to be part of it, is they do things like, once again, it sounds so ridiculously obvious and simple, but there's a reason you see a lot of great principals standing at the gate and standing at the crossing, because they realize, actually, I have like some of the most stakeholders of any job. And if I can get 2 minutes with so many of these different families and teachers and kids, you end up putting out tiny fires that don't end up landing in your office and becoming 1 hour long meetings. And so I see that with a lot of principals. It's like, I'm so busy that I have to just shut the door and get on top of this. And it's like, well, actually, sometimes the answer is, what are you trying to get on top of? Maybe you need to get out there and, for them, go and spend time at the gate every morning, because that's how you kind of get ahead of the challenges that a lot of principals have, so they don't end up in your room. But that's easy to say now, coming in externally and working, but I can 100% see how, if you're feeling overwhelmed, you're in that role, what got you there has been just head down, pumping out like amazing work. That'd be your go-to. But I don't think much of leadership is about that. I think it's usually about getting out there with people, in front of people, in the trenches with people, in rooms, meeting with people. And so, and you're right, some of that, I know for me, that was very, like, some of that really didn't come naturally to me. So that's why I do love a framework for how to run a meeting. And that's been so helpful, because I'm like, okay, I can do this. I can make this this is my thing I want to work really well at, is how do I invest in people? How do I build a team? Those things, once you work out how to do them, that's the real work of leadership, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think leadership can't be invisible in any industry. And, even in every industry, I would say, that I've worked in, there's always going to be some leaders that do want to go into their office and do the work, which is fine. But I don't think that you can say that I'm being a leader when I'm doing that. The whole definition of leading is that people can see you and follow. If they can't see you, they can't follow. And so, I think you're spot on that it really needs to be a visible and intentional process. So if we come back to the idea of delegating, and that is a really critical component of freeing up the time to be, visible and out in the world. How do you suggest people determine which tasks to delegate? Do you have, is there a framework that you utilize for that?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what kind of the framework is that'll be in my book, Replace Yourself, because it kind of touches on this. This is one part of it. But there's three phases that I talk about in Replace Yourself, which is, and I'll kind of articulate the big idea of that book and where I think it kind of is different to what else is out there. But the first phase is all about identifying your replacement. So when you talk about replace yourself, if I go back one step, sorry, just to give it context, what I'm starting the book with is, I'm talking about this thing that I'm seeing around burnout factories. Like, what is going on with work in the world where I feel like we're pumping out burned out, it's like, we'll have, I remember the New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, when she stepped away from that role, one of the things she talked about was like feeling like she was, and that's a role where I get it. Like I just don't think I could do that kind of role. And then I know friends who have stepped away from roles where they're, on the front line, but they're finding they're burned out and they just want to go and stack shelves and find a job where there's not people. So it's like, what is going on that we're burning out people in our organizations, and how do we flip it? And what would it look like to create leadership factories which I do see out there, where you have, over years and decades, you look around and you go, wait a second, I'm seeing a pattern, like 15 different leaders in this industry all came from that one company, and yet they've all gone up. And so a key thing in that, which is really comes back to this being threatened. I think the first thing I'd say that in terms of determining what task to give, I will answer that question, is that we need to have an abundance mindset, and we need to not be threatened. And we need to realize, you know what, as a leader, I think it's ideal to raise up 3 people in your team who could do your job, at least. Like, what does it look like to have in your team 3 people who could all step into your role? And at the same time, if you do that, then you need to realize you're probably not going to keep all 3, because unless you're part of a really large company where they can kind of shift sideways and up, there's a really good chance that 1 or 2 of those people on your team are going to leave. And so I think that's really important as part of this conversation, to be okay with that. And so this is a really key starting point. Identify your replacement, and not just one person, but who are the people. I like to use Patrick Lencioni's ideal team player, humble, hungry, people smart, in terms of thinking about who are the people who are most humble, most driven, hungry, and most emotionally intelligent, people smart. That's a great little framework for thinking about who, and thinking about multiple people replacing me. And then from that point, then it becomes a case of going, okay, there's probably the key thing I'd say that I'll talk about in the book about choosing what tasks, is to understand what fills you up. Because if you understand as a leader what fills you up with energy, often the other side of that coin is that's where you're in your sweet spot. So I have a leader I'm working with, and he is amazing at rallying groups of people, galvanizing. So for him, he is at his best. His cup is full when he is doing that with groups of people, rallying them. It's also where the organization gets their best from him. So should he start by delegating any of that kind of work? Well, I think a helpful place to start is to say probably not. Instead, what are the things in his role that he has to do, but right now, but actually drain him? Like put a hole in the coffee cup and the coffee just flows out, and it's and if you can identify those things, so that would be one key thing. What are the things that I'm doing that I have to do right now, but I could actually delegate, and because they're things that I'm not in my sweet spot, so everyone's not getting the best from me doing it. They're also not filling me up, so it's not the best for me. And ultimately, if there's someone on your team where that is their sweet spot, then that's the no-brainer. That's the easiest win to start with. Get them to do it, because that is their. And I was talking with a leader recently who was talking about strategy, and they were saying for them, the real strategic thinking is not their sweet spot. And they have someone on their team who's amazing at that. So that's one area that they can start doing some delegation, and just know that that's going to help them by training that person up with what they know, but knowing that they're in their sweet spot. So I'd say that's kind of how I think about it. And then just to finish the framework of the book. So identify your replacement, focusing on humble, hungry, people smart, focusing on starting with what are the things that I'm not in my sweet spot doing? How can I delegate those? Now, once you start, you then start with the Square of Delegated Responsibility by saying, I do, you watch. So wherever possible, you might say, look, this strategy stuff, you know what? It's probably not my sweet spot, but it's something that I think you're really great at, and I can see this, and you kind of speak vision over what you see in them and potential. And you say to them, so I'd love for you to start watching how I do that. And then initially just watch and let's talk about it. But eventually I'd like you to start helping with it. And maybe this is something you can really take a role in on this team. And then you move to the second phase. So number 1 is really identifying your replacement and having that initial conversation. The second phase is then about replacing yourself. And so this is where you effectively go around the Square of Delegated Responsibility. So you're taking that person who's now involved with the strategic thinking in the team, and they're really helping you with that. And then maybe that's not the best example, because some of that is always going to still sit on your plate, but you move them around the Square of Delegated Responsibility. And the big idea of the book is that, like we said, it's so hard to be intentional with this. And so what stops us is that we're often not thinking about it until it's too late. And so some people will think that my book is about succession planning, replace yourself. And it's like, yes, but no. Succession planning is too late. If you're thinking about this when you're 2 years from retirement, but you've never thought about it before, that's not what it's about. I want a 25-year-old leader who's got 40, 50 years left in leadership to be thinking about this, because the third phase is where you actually coach the person that's replacing you to start the process themselves. And that creates this multiplication, because we learn best by teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And so once the person who's taking on some of that strategy is working on that, it's then the case of going, okay, now who is there on your team that you can start actually taking them on the Square of Delegated Responsibility? And the idea is you have this multiplication throughout a whole organization where everyone is replacing themselves and trying to build up 3 people who could replace them. And if you can get that through a whole organization, I believe that's pretty transformational.
Yeah, I agree. One of my favorite, what would we say, criteria or signs of a strong leader, and this is from Simon Sinek said this, is that no one notices when you're not there. And I know that's not what you're saying. You're talking about more, replacing yourself, sort of filling your own seat. But it's along the same lines, because it means that your team is so empowered, and they've been so expansive within their role and able to take on things beyond their remit, that you can literally leave the organization for a period of time and everything continues to tick along.
Yes.
He uses an example where an organization, their revenue is in growth, the CEO has a leave of absence because they're unwell, the revenue starts to plummet until they come back, and then they fix it back up again. And that's such an indication that CEO is not an effective leader, because they're holding on to everything themselves. And similar to what you were saying before, a lot of what drives that is fear of irrelevance, I think.
Yeah.
If I don't hold on to this, if anyone else can do what I do, then I'm no longer this important ego-driven person.
Yeah.
So I think there's some inner work that needs to be done in terms of this idea of replacing yourself.
Yeah.
But I also do think that delegating is a really critical component of that.
Yes.
If I could be so bold as to add one layer to the 3 steps that I think that I see a lot, and it's probably even before you get to your book, there are so many leaders out there who are still performing tasks that are not within their remit anymore. And I think the first step, if you're like, okay, my bandwidth is completely blown out, I'm screaming towards burnout. Step 1 is, what am I still doing that actually isn't my role?
Yeah, that's good.
Or doesn't need to be my role? Because that's like the simple, okay, if I'm running every team meeting, but I have a senior leader who reports to me, they could be doing that. Or if I see this all the time, if I'm demanding that I still have approval of, I used to work in an organization where the global CEO still wanted to have approval of social media posts.
Oh, that's so funny.
And it's like, well, step 1, trust your team members.
Yeah.
And start to let go of the tasks that are important, but that there is room for error, so they can start to build up their own abilities and skill set in a safe way. And then you can start to offload more. Then when you're at your remit only, then I think you step into those 3 steps of, okay, who are my ideal replacements? What can I start to delegate them? Getting them on the journey at a task level, and then how do I coach them into filling my shoes?
Yeah, I like that. Might have to add that step in. It's good, Jacqui.
You can quote me in your book.
Yeah.
If
gold.
it's not printed yet, you can just
No, it's still being written, so I think it's actually a good point. No, it is, and it's so true that there are so many. I was on a podcast recently where we were talking about something similar, and they said they were part of an organization when they were younger, that when they did particular, I think it was also something to do with like content and things like that, they had 13 approvals required to get one piece out. And so it's funny how how we hold on to those things. Actually, one thing that I think can be really helpful that I heard on a podcast, and I can't remember who said it, but they were saying that what what they did in one role was they stepped in. Actually, it was Marty Moore from the No Bullshit Leadership podcast, and he said that they had all these reports, too many reports happening in the organization, which is a bit different to what we're talking about. But they said let's just stop all but like the extremely non-negotiable ones, and then let's see what happens. And if people are kind of really feeling like they miss it and they need it, then we'll bring them back. Anyway, so they did this process, and then they had some people, where things did need, they were dropping the ball because they now didn't have something needed. Anyway, they ended up only bringing back 10%. And so I think that's, pretty true, at least the 80-20 rule in terms of like there's a lot of things that we'll have on our plate that, like you said, a helpful starting point with delegation is to start by getting the things you don't need to be doing off your plate.
Yeah, absolutely. So especially in the model that you've outlined that you're covering off in your book, and in a lot of cases, our workload just continues to grow and grow and grow. What are your thoughts in terms of like striking the balance between giving team members more tasks and things to do to develop them or to, stretch them or to replace ourselves or whatever? How do we balance that and them getting overwhelmed and then just delegating the burnout from us to them, basically?
Yeah, great question. I think this comes back to a foundational shift that we need to make in work globally, which is, I think when it comes to burnout, we think in quantity. So we think, how much do I have on my plate? How many hours am I doing? And I think some of that is kind of misplaced. I think a big part of burnout is about the quality in terms of what type of work am I doing. If we come back to that sweet spot, I know for me, I can definitely reflect on roles where I was feeling burned out or really in an unhealthy place, where I was doing less hours than I often do in my current role leading Clarity. And so the good thing for me, I'm a small business owner, so I can pick and choose, and I can really make sure I find the things where Jonno is in his absolute sweet spot, so everyone gets the most value. But it also means, because I'm in those places, like that kind of flow, that it fills me up. So my challenge is I need to stop doing work because it's work that's so filling. Now, I think this is so hard in large corporates because you so often just need someone to do a particular job. There's a position description that has to be done so many hours a day or a week. So I would probably throw this in that when it comes to our own burnout and our team's burnout, I think one of the lowest pieces of hanging fruit is some low hanging fruit is really to think about where am I in my sweet spot and where are they in their sweet spot? Because sometimes if you can take one project off someone that's really draining. Once again, I use Patrick Lencioni's Working Genius assessment. I'm a bit of a Lencioni mega fan. But he talks about this idea that when you're in your genius, it's like a coffee cup with the lid on where it stays hot all day, every day. But your frustrations is where there's like a hole in the coffee cup. And no matter how much coffee you pour in, it's draining the life out of me before it even, it doesn't even hit my lips. And it's like, okay, what are the tasks for me that are draining the coffee cup of my life? How do I do less of them? What are the things that I do that fill me up and like a lid on a thermos, keep it, and how can I do more of them? And then with my team, what's going on for them? What are the things? Sometimes if you can remove 2 hours from their week of life draining activity specific to them, which will be different person to person, that can be a massive domino effect. Or if you can give them permission or add in something that's incredibly life-giving to their plate, then it helps to balance everything else out. I know that's not the whole picture, but I think that's one key perspective that larger corporates, larger institutions, we have to find a way to somehow do that in amidst the bureaucracy. Otherwise, we will just keep burning people out.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's a really valid and important point that we look at what's driving burnout, Because we do, like you said, you could have someone working 100 hours a week and having all the energy in the world because they're doing energy giving work
Yeah.
versus someone who's working 20 hours a week who is like at burnout because they're
Mhm.
doing energy draining work. So it's about knowing yourself and also knowing your team members and having that trust-filled open dialogue around what lights them up. Some of the challenge does definitely occur where the leader and the team member share energy giving tasks. So they both love doing the same stuff and they both don't love
Yes.
doing the other stuff.
Yeah,
And
that's
that's
true.
got to be a bit of a push and pull and a conversation. And, there's got to be a bit of lenience and gifting of the good stuff sometimes to keep people engaged. But I do agree with you that it's about assessing where that energy source is and also not assuming a team member's capacity, because I think a lot of the time we'll go, oh, they're busy, so I won't give them anything. I'll just, take my laptop on holiday to Bali with me and I'll do everything because I couldn't possibly burden them.
Yeah.
And that's not just a random example. I had a client who actually did that. And then when she spoke to her team and started delegating more, she said they've never been more engaged.
Yeah.
And they've said to her, thank you so much. Like, we feel trusted, we feel supported. They became incredibly loyal. And she had underestimated their capacity. They all had probably about 15 to 20% more capacity than what she had assumed.
That's so cool.
So I think that, knowing your team, having open conversation, before just hurling work at people, say, hey, can we just have a chat? What's your capacity like at the moment? I've got this project. I know you love to work in this area. How much of that could you take on at this point? How much support do you need from me? Let's work through it together and see how we can collaborate and get the output that we need, but stretch you a little bit and lighten my load a little bit. So it's just, yeah, I think it's a valid point. It's ebbs and flows, right?
Yeah.
Not just this one way task allocation.
100%. And there's a real art to it as well, because you'll see some leaders, two leaders kind of doing the same thing. And one, like, is in terms of giving the same level of task or something. And one leader, their team will be really jubilant and kind of upbeat. And then you look at the other leader and their team is just like really feeling just empty. And so I think there is a bit of an art to it for the leader as well. It's like looking at two paintings and going, I don't know what it is between these. They use the same stuff, but one of these is just, so there's that art element as well to leadership where, you see a great leader and they have that ability to really, like a really great leader can somehow keep their people really engaged, even in the really hard moments and things. So I think that's in there as well, which is a bit of a harder to find art of leadership.
Yeah, I think it does. And maybe this is another episode, but it does speak to the foundations of trust and psychological safety and open communication. Because if you can start with all of those building blocks, then when things do get really high pressure and stressful and urgent, you've got a really solid base to work off, rather than thinking, yep, I'll build trust later. I don't have time to do that yet. And then you don't have anything to lean on.
True. I think that's a massive part of it.
Yeah. Well, I know that you've got to get going. Thank you so much for your time today and sharing your thoughts on delegation and all of those things that come along with it. We've got all of the links to your books and hopefully your new book. Do you have an approximate date of when the new book is due?
No, I mean, I'd love to get it out. It's a good question. I'd love, hopefully in 2025 it'll come out. So that's my deadline, because it's all there. All the pieces are there. It's just a case of getting it done. So 2025.
Right. Heard it here first, folks. We'll keep an eye out for it. Jonno, thanks so much for your time. And to everyone listening, I hope you got a lot out of our conversation today, and we'll see you next time.